What does Optus's deal with Starlink mean for regional Australians? And how is Australia's consumer watchdog cracking down on dodgy data brokers? Vertical Hold is brought to you by Uniden Australia. Hey there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the award-winning tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists and commentators to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and this week I'm still not joined as usual by Alex Kidman, who is currently on his Japanese odyssey trying to probably clear every retro game out of Akihabara. See how many suitcases he can cram it all into. So I was tempted to pull out that long-awaited supply chain special, but I don't think Alex would ever trust me with the keys to the Vertical Hold studios again, so I guess I better play by the rules. Thankfully, there's plenty of tech news around here, so we can keep supply chain on the back burner. This week, Optus has decided that, like Telstra, it wants to hook up with Elon Musk's Starlink satellite service to extend its reach in regional Australia. Later, we're going to dive into the details of that. But first, the ACCC has decided to turn its attention to dodgy data brokers. We're joined once again by the Consumer Policy Research Centre's Digital Policy Director, Chandni Gupta. Chandni, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me again.
So I'm sure you'd love to chat about the latest in supply chain, but I'm also keen to know why the ACCC is worried about dodgy data brokers. Maybe start off by telling us, what is a data broker?
So, data brokers are basically like a modern day alchemist of the data world. They're mining and refining various bits of our personal information, and then they're sharing and selling it on to businesses who can then use it to refine their targeting strategies, which can be anything from personalizing what products you're offered at what price, or whether you're even excluded from particular products or offers. There's really very little to no transparency in how personal information is collected and shared and used. And we also don't know really how our offline data is merged with our online data. And often all of this is happening without us even knowing. So it's really great to see ACCC really looking into this and probing a little bit more. What we've seen with them is that they have previously looked into businesses that collect, share, and use data of their own customers. But this is that next step, because this is where a data is being collected by a third party, hence the data broker, in so many ways. And so it's really great that they're looking into it and they're really going to probe, because it hasn't been a lot of probing into this particular market in the data space.
The whole thing sounds pretty kind of dodgy, to be honest. What role do they play in the ecosystem? Like, why do we need them, and how do they get my data?
Yeah, so why do we need them? I, I don't actually know if we actually need them. So there are some who claim that data brokers can help businesses with identifying or preventing fraud. But if a business is using just a data broker to do that, I mean, they've got bigger problems.
Hmm.
Really, what we're seeing at the moment is that data brokers are really facilitating a way to curate a personal profile on people, and really curating what the online pieces look like for someone. And they're doing it in so many ways. And they're collecting it through how you browse online, when you're using social media, when you're shopping online, um, though even when you're using those lovely loyalty cards. They're collecting all of that information through all of those means, and then putting it together in a way to create that really unique profile about you. In fact, it's basically many businesses that we interact with on a day-to-day basis will have some form of data sharing arrangement with these services. So it's happening a lot more than what we can possibly imagine.
So part of the problem is that you sign up with a retailer or a service provider that you trust, and you say, okay, I trust them. I'll give them my name, my date of birth. I'll let them know what I'm interested in. I'll give them my mobile number. But what you don't realize is they're actually sharing slash on selling that to someone else who is then collating that and then selling it to someone else again. And then you wonder why all these other people are contacting you or tracking
Exactly.
you. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. What we've really seen with the way this operates is there's a definite mismatch between what Australians expect and what is actually currently happening to their data. So our research recently looked at what Australians are thinking about when it comes to privacy and their data, and we found 74% of Australians are just not comfortable with companies sharing or selling their personal information, and less than 10% of Australians are comfortable with the way targeted advertising that's based on tracking our online behavior and our personal characteristics, they're just not comfortable with it at all. So you've got this real mismatch with what people expect businesses to be doing with their data when they're trusting them to what is actually happening in reality. And it means that often all of this is actually really hidden in those wonderful terms and conditions, which we all love to read, and they don't go that next step to see. And they shouldn't be expected to be reading 90,000 word terms
Mm.
and conditions every time you sign up to a loyalty card. There should be a set level of trust that this is a business I trust and I know that they will do right by me. But what is happening is quite different to what's expected.
So, are there laws about in Australia about what they can do, how they can access data, what they can share?
So there are actually laws. In fact, within the privacy principles, there's even a specific principle that says that you cannot collect information about an individual if it's not directly from the individual. But there are businesses, obviously, who are very much playing within this space, whether they are collecting it via the data broker, and then you've got data brokers who are collecting it through various means, anything from screen scraping to monitoring and tracking our behavior online. And so there are laws, but they don't go quite far enough. We also, as you know, the Privacy Act is very much in the 80s
Mm.
at the moment. It is getting a review, and that's going to absolutely help. I mean, other there are other countries who have more strengthened laws in privacy. Still not quite to perhaps what we need in terms of the data broking space, but there are laws there, and strengthening those privacy protections, especially a lot of the recommendations that were made by the Attorney General in back in March, it will really help kind of take that one step further to really see what is it that is being collected and shared and used, and is it in the interest of the consumer?
So the ACCC has not got to the point where it's actually saying this is what has to be done. At the moment, they're sort of put out a paper and they're getting input from the industry and from other people about what perhaps should be done. Are there examples of the kind of dodgy behavior that they're concerned about? Because the whole thing sounds a bit dodgy, yet obviously it's not illegal because they do it. So where is the line between what they do that's dodgy but we look the other way and what they do that's so dodgy that we should stop them from doing it?
So one of the things that a lot of these companies uh, play in is in the space of that it's de-identified, non-identifiable data, which makes it where, because our personal information definition of personal information is so limited, it means that can weirdly enough play in this de-identified space. But there's so much research now out there, and so much evidence out there to confirm that it's actually really easy to re-identify de-identified data.
Hmm.
um, and so some of the dodgy behaviors in some of our previous research into data brokers, we've found companies like Quantium, who's also been noted in the ACCC's paper, was using de-identified transaction data from NAB, which was supporting advertising for sports bet. So
Ooh.
you can draw the line between what data brokers are doing and how easily it can lead to exploiting someone's vulnerabilities, all in the name for a profit.
Yeah. And so does it also there's also, I would assume, like a privacy and a security threat as well. I'm thinking of now the Equifax hack, which was a while ago. I thought that they were a credit checking agency, but are they a data broker or a credit checking agency or both? And what was so important about that hack?
So they're kind of like in the middle line of both, um, and being a credit also a credit reporting firm, they were also then having access to so much data, and as a result, would could then data broke it. Any organization that is in the space of collecting data opens itself and collecting all sorts of data from all sorts of places opens itself up to a data breach or and some form of hack. And we've seen that even with really reputable companies here in Australia last year and earlier this year. So anything where a company where has hordes of data, you are going to open yourself up to some form of data hack when you're not actually looking in the space of, well, am I collecting this for the purpose that it needs to be, or am I collecting it because it is there to be collected and used? And one of the really tricky things when it comes to data broking is for the actual end user. So if you were in the case of Equifax, because the consumers, how are they even meant to know that the company had their data
Hmm.
and what's been breached? So some of the other data breaches where it's that you have a direct relationship with the company that's been hacked, there is even then there's not great support for the individual. But in these kind of circumstances, that support is even less available because one, you don't know when it was collected, what was collected, how it was collected, how it's being used, and what was happening to even then go down the path of any kind of redress.
That's sort of the what's really questionable when you look at Equifax. Like I said, I thought that they were primarily a credit reporting agency, but depending on how you look at it, some people think that they're primarily a data broker, and it's almost like they do the credit reporting thing on the side to give them an excuse to collect all that data. Are there other examples like that where um, businesses that want to be data brokers could then take on other roles to justify why they're holding so much data because we also do this?
It's highly possible that you'd end up having this kind of mixed business models that were taking place. So the likes of Quantium or Experian, Oracle or Nielsen, they're all in this space where they're working with really big companies. So when you say these names, you actually don't, most people wouldn't know what these companies are and they would have never heard of them. But then when you look at the names that they're working with, the likes of big supermarkets, the big four banks, the big tech retailers, then you start to see that how much they are very much part of our everyday lives.
One thing I've thought of that might be a bit relevant, what's happened to me, and I always suspected maybe there was some kind of data broker in the middle. In my house, we've noticed that if you get a bit generous and decide to donate money to one cause, suddenly all these other causes start ringing you and sending you letters. And it's almost as if they get together and swap details on, oh, this person's a bit of a soft touch. They gave us $50. You should ask from us $50 as well. Or could that be an example of a data broker in the middle going, look, this person's known to donate to causes. So yeah, go and hit them up.
There's That's very likely that
Yeah.
there is something happening in the middle there. Often, when we are, for example, giving money to charity or we're signing up to a new service or anything like that, we are not looking down the path of the terms and conditions and what the privacy policy is. And 90% of people don't, and
Yeah.
those who do have often said that when they do, they go ahead with it because there is it's the only way to get a particular product or service. So in your case, clearly that's been where by donating, and you're actually doing something great, um, by donating, you're actually also not only donating your money, you've also donated your data.
Yeah, thank you
In
very
in
much.
so I'm so sorry for your for your loss there, but it is, and I think one of the things that comes up a lot in this data broking space, and I feel like we'll hear a lot about it in the coming weeks, is that data broking allows things to be free online. And can I will just say there's never been anything such there's been nothing such as a free lunch. There's no such thing as a free lunch. There is no such thing as a free product or service. If you are not paying through your money, you are most likely paying it through your data,
Hmm.
or you are paying through your money and you're then also having your data shared as well.
So what kind of changes could they make? Because like to think of it on a really simple level. There was a time when these people would call you about things and you could say, okay, I put myself in the do not call register. And that, well, at least for me, that seemed to be fairly effective. But I had to actually ring a few of these, and I now know they were data brokers. I had to track it back and tell them, like, take my number off your list. Every now and someone would ring me and I'd say, where'd you get my number from? And I did that a few times and then they all stopped. So, but there's no equivalent of instead of a do not call list, there's like a do not track list, is there? And even if there was, I'm not sure how it would work.
Well, I mean, you'd be sitting there all day trying to untrack yourself
Yeah.
from the tracks. Yeah, I think that that is the other thing. It is such an opaque space for people and policymakers to navigate. Um, it's it's a space where if you were to actually say that you don't want probably the only way out is to be able to say, oh well, I won't participate
Go
in
off the grid.
anything that is collecting. I'll go
Yeah.
completely off the
Burn
grid.
off your fingerprints. Live in a log cabin.
Exactly. And what that would actually end up leaving you with is very little to no options. If any, you're probably just left with doing business with the lemonade stand run by the local kids in your street. There will be nothing else because of how much is there. So what can possibly be done? We see that there's three things that really feel could help make a difference in this space. One is, of course, strengthening our privacy protections. And one way to do this, we have looked into how the onus shouldn't be on the consumer. So just like you said, that you are the one who's having to call, make the call and say, do not add me to this or take me off this particular list. That shouldn't be on the consumer, given how widely the data is out there and how it's used. We'd really like to see some form of a best interest duty or a duty of care where data is collected, shared, and used in a way that is always achieving fair outcomes for the consumer. And we're seeing it done overseas slowly. It's you need something where there's this baseline standard of minimum safety so that Australians don't have to navigate a complex system and have to suddenly become privacy experts in order to be able to confidently be online. So there's that. There's also our we really need to look at whether there's a way to ban unfair practices, and one way to do that is um, Australia bringing in a prohibition on unfair trading practices. It's across a lot of other jurisdictions. I don't see why we couldn't have it in Australia. And it'll be interesting when it is. We know that the Minister for Consumer Affairs is currently looking into what that could look like. But it could have ways where you could actually call out particular data practices that could just be banned because they exploit or cause some form of harm to individuals or a community. In the meantime, though, what we really want to see is our regulators using the powers they have to probe these businesses and their practices and hold them to account to our current consumer protections. And so, ACCC, for example, has information gathering powers under the Act. And so there is a way to potentially look at probing the frameworks. And I feel like this is probably their one start of how they're doing this, but using those powers to really probe what is it what is the framework that data brokers operate in? What does it look like? And then identify whether there are unfair contract terms, whether there's operations in there that are misleading and deceptive, and then work with the likes of the privacy regulator to see if there's actually breaches within the current privacy principles. So, a lot of the concerns that are coming up in this space are very much. Um, I don't touch just one part of our law or one part of our protections. And so it's really an opportunity for regulators to be working together and seeing working together more than they already are doing now to really look at new creative ways of how they can use the powers they have now to really probe some of these practices.
Enjoying the show? That's great. Don't forget to subscribe, which you can do on every podcast platform you've ever heard of. Just search for Vertical Hold or go to our website, verticalhold.com.au, where we've got handy buttons for every single podcast platform.
So it feels like it was only last week that we were talking about Telstra doing deals with Elon Musk's Starlink. Hang on. It was last week. So this week, Optus has decided that it wants a slice of the action. And to find out what that means for Australians, we're joined once again by Finder's telco expert, Mariam Gabaji. Mariam, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
So we thought, okay, Telstra's done this deal with Starlink, and it's the first deal like that Starlink's done. And Optus are like, no, we won't be beaten. So tell us about the Optus deal. What have they announced, and how's it different to what Telstra's doing with them?
The Telstra versus Optus competition is continuing. Telstra's partnership with SpaceX or Starlink is a bit different. It's focusing on broadband, so connecting Australians to a better internet connection, according to them. Whereas Optus is focusing on mobile connectivity across Australia instead. So what this means is we've always known that Telstra has dominated in regional Australia. It's just got a better mobile network coverage, and Optus is trying to take a slice of the pie as well by partnering with Starlink.
So how does this work? Because we're talking about satellites, but we're talking about mobile phones. Do I need a new phone, or is the satellite talking to mobile towers?
So that's what's interesting. You would have almost assumed that you'd need a brand new handset. So something that's probably not out in the market just yet. So not even just one that's 5G compatible. But so we had a chat with Optus about it, and they said it might work with most 4G compatible handsets. 3G is old technology, so that's sort of out of the window. And if you look at how T-Mobile and SpaceX have partnered. They did a test, and it used just a general smartphone, not even one with satellite connectivity, using T-Mobile's mid-band spectrum to send through an SMS. I would assume something similar. We'll see something similar. Optus is going to be running a lot of tests along with SpaceX to see what these compatible devices look like. But it says people won't need like any additional, tech.
Yeah. Because with the Telstra deal, I think one of the things they were talking about to extend the regional coverage is they were going to use Starlink satellites as like a backhaul for their mobile tower. So your mobile phone would still be talking to the mobile tower, but then it would be bouncing it up via the satellite to get back to the network. But that's not what Optus is talking about, is it? They're talking about the phone in your hand talking directly to the satellite in the sky.
Yeah, that's correct. No backhaul involved in this. Your phone will directly talk to the satellite, and by I think late 2024, you should be able to send an SMS. And late 2025, you'll see voice and data services be included.
And it said clear line of sight of the sky, obviously, because you're looking at the satellite. So do we think that means maybe no indoor coverage?
I would assume so. It's still early days. They haven't revealed what the features will look like, what the capabilities will be exactly. But it might be right to assume that it might not work indoors.
So as you say, this is a big deal for Optus because Telstra and Optus have always sort of competed on coverage, and Telstra's always had the upper hand. How much do you think this will change the dynamic between Telstra and Optus, especially in regional areas when Telstra's always been able to say, "Oh yeah, but no one's as good as us"?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It depends on what Telstra announces next. We've already seen 2 partnership announcements that are slightly different. Telstra is trying to, work on improving its 5G connections and building that out, especially with the 3G closure, and trying to build that on those dead spots where 4G signals aren't as strong. But obviously, what Optus has announced is a game changer because it's going to expand to areas where you have no cell phone towers, etc. So it's just going to be a wait and see game to see what Telstra's next steps are going to be.
So, yeah, as you say, because this is using satellite, when you're using mobile phones, relying on mobile phone towers, you're still going to have places in the middle of nowhere where no one wants to build a mobile phone tower. But in theory, because it's the low Earth orbit satellites that we talked about last week, so there's dozens of them whizzing around all the time. You can hit one or the other. So in theory, there's nowhere in Australia it shouldn't be able to reach.
That's exactly true. I think there are a couple of territories or in Western Australia, like some quiet zones where it won't work, but for majority, Optus did say almost 100% coverage across Australia.
Do you think that the kind of thing that they would charge extra for, or do you think it would be an automatic sort of roaming thing when you get off the Optus mobile network, you just roam onto these satellites?
I have 2 thoughts about this. So either, this is going to be an additional added as a perk on their Optus postpaid plans, which could end up increasing in price. We've seen the bigger telcos do that in the last couple of years, increase their plan prices, and it'll just be an additional perk. Or it could be used as an add-on. So, for instance, if you're, traveling around these areas where you don't have cell phone signals, you might get covered if you just switch on the add-on, and it'll be like maybe an extra $5 or something.
So it's almost like international roaming, except it's intra-national roaming, if I'm using the word correctly.
Yeah, I think so. It'll be interesting to see what their prices are like. For example, with Telstra, they're offering a couple of additional perks such as professional installation, phone services, and being able to access customer support. But obviously, we think it'll come at an additional cost as compared to going with potentially Starlink directly. So it could be slightly similar for Optus.
Is there anyone else? Because I know there's such a thing as a satellite phone that talks directly to satellite networks like maybe Iridium. It's a while since I've written about that kind of stuff. Is there anyone else? Are there any other mainstream telcos in Australia that are doing something like this that will talk to satellites? Or for any of that, do you need to go to a dedicated satellite phone service?
Yeah, so satellite phones have been around since the 1990s. They're bulky. You've got, like you mentioned, Iridium. You've got specific satellite phone plans for those type of situations. I think Telstra and Optus are right now the main telcos that are looking into this space. I think it depends on how maybe phone brands work with different partners as well. They might have their own partnership. You have the iPhone 14 that has some sort of satellite connectivity capability, so you can send an SOS signal. Obviously, that still relies on a call center to be able to make that happen. So it just depends on what other partnerships get formed.
But I would imagine if that you were someone in Australia who, I don't know, was in the mining sector or someone who worked in the middle of nowhere and paid a shed load of money each month for a satellite phone, you'd be very interested in this deal.
I think so. I mean, it opens up so many more options. That's the whole thing where I guess your Telstra and Optus, they're trying to bridge that digital divide between metro and regional Australia. And, as we all know, that the tech in regional Australia is lacking in terms of mobile network coverage and just broadband. So, yeah, this will definitely open up a lot more options.
So when we talked about Telstra last week, that had a lot of implications for the NBN because what Telstra was proposing for broadband was basically an alternative to going with NBN's Sky Muster. Now, what Optus is doing is not really the equivalent. Are they are they cutting NBN's lunch here? Because you couldn't do this kind of phone service off NBN's Sky Muster satellites, could you?
No, you can't. So NBN's obviously just more focused on the broadband area, but it does. I guess we've seen with Starlink, it's given NBN quite a run for its money as well. You've had NBN's lost customers, and that's probably why I think the NBN's trialed their Premium Plus plan and then officially launched as well to be able to give those faster speeds because, about 25 Mbps isn't really a lot, or having so much metered data for like your general online activities. So yeah, it's definitely, I think it'll be interesting to see what the NBN Co does next as it tries to keep up pace.
The other thing I was imagining is that if you're Optus, you're probably not going to want to share this with your MVNOs, your, I don't know, Coles and Woolworths and all those kind of resellers. Is it fair to assume that they're actually, with Telstra and Optus talking to the likes of Starlink, that your MVNOs kind of start to get a bit left out here?
So again, I think we can base this all on a theory,
Hmm.
but with Optus and the MVNOs that are run on its network, they've been able to get full access to its 4G network and then obviously 5G network as well. We've also seen the likes of Amazon introduce 5G on its regular plans as well. Optus might try to differentiate itself by offering this feature, and whereas everyone else has sort of similar features to Optus in terms of like 4G and 5G network coverage.
So a few years ago, we were talking a lot about the fact that Telstra and TPG wanted to form a regional partnership, and I think it was to do with sharing towers, sharing spectrum, basically teaming up to get better overall coverage, but reduce competition, which is why in the end they wouldn't let them do it. Are the announcements we're seeing from the likes of Telstra and Optus in the last couple of weeks, is that part of the ongoing fallout of the fact that that partnership didn't happen?
Yeah, so Optus must have had this in the bag anyway. It's been opposed to the TPG Telstra partnership, but given this announcement, I think it just wanted to sort of put a stamp on, sort of like that regional space as well. Whereas if it had been with the TPG and Telstra partnership, this would have been taken not a backseat because it's a completely different sort of technology, but the customer base might not have been as large, for instance. So yeah, I think with Telstra and TPG not having that deal, it'll maybe open up competition, but does it benefit regional Australia? I think it's to be decided on how both their new partnerships with Starlink play out.
So TPG starting to look like the odd one out here.
Yeah, it's always been focused on metro areas, and obviously it wanted to expand to that. But given what's happening in the space right now, it feels like it's going to be Telstra and Optus right at the front, and that trend's probably going to continue.
Well, it's interesting to see that Telstra and Optus have taken their fight literally to a new level, and we'll see how it plays out over the next couple of years. Thanks for making the time for us.
Nah, thank you. Always interesting to see what's happening in the tech space, and especially with satellite technology sort of on the forefront of everybody's minds. It'll be an interesting couple of years ahead.
And before we lose the satellite link, I've got to hit you with the vertical hold 3 questions of doom. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And the big contentious question, if I made you Australia's telco El Presidente for the day, what would be your decree?
So for the first question, you can find my work on finder.com.au. And you can look me up there. All my content's over there. You can also find me on Twitter, LinkedIn. Those are my main 2 go-tos. And, free, really, really affordable mobile mobile plans for everybody.
I think you'll make a lot of friends with that decree.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Well, that just about wraps it up for this week's episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Chandni for joining us on the show this week.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be back.
And as usual, I'm going to hit you up with the Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom. Alex isn't here, so it falls on me. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And if we declared you the consumer watchdog El Presidente for the day, what would be your decree?
Oh, great questions. Well, you can find my work on the Consumer Policy Research Centre's website. So that's cprc.org.au. You can find me on LinkedIn if you just search Chandni Gupta, and on Twitter at __ Chandni Gupta, because there's quite a few out there apparently. And in terms of, yes, if I was oh my goodness. If I was certainly one of the things I'd really like to be doing is using more of my information gathering powers, like I said, to really probe the systems and really see what is it that the data brokers such as these and what are the other data practices that are happening, really kind of uncover what is currently quite opaque. And I'd be advocating hard and strong, which I think ACCC is at the moment, about on bringing in a ban on unfair trading
Mm.
practices and getting the government to put together options and put forward options that are really going to make a difference to all Australians.
So carry a big stick.
Yes, pretty
I love
much.
it. And you can catch us on Twitter at Vertical Hold AU or the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or you can head over to verticalhold.com.au. And thanks for dropping by, and don't be afraid to drop us a line and let us know your thoughts on what we talked about this week. Vertical Hold is brought to you by Uniden Australia.